Alright, and welcome to the Square Fruit tutorial. And this is really a fun project that you can do to impress your family and friends. And we don't have to really create just a square fruit or square apple. We can actually create all different types of shapes using the methods that I will describe during the video. And you can see in this one, though, we're going to create this square apple, and we're going to make it look like it was sliced open. But we can also remove that slice and just have the whole apple there, almost like, it just looks like a cube. Almost resembles like a candle or something like that. But the way I did this is I drew a three-dimensional box. I wasn't perfect. It doesn't have to be perfect, but we all are familiar with how 3 dimensions are, and so it doesn't really, you don't need to have any skills or anything like that. All I did was use the line tool in Photoshop to draw the line around the apple, and then I formed the apple to that shape. So you could use, or you can create another shape and then form the apple to that shape. It really doesn't matter, but I thought I'm going to go ahead and keep this basic for this first try here, and then you can go ahead and take it on and do whatever you want. So let's not mess around and get started. Alright, so we're inside the Adobe Bridge. I'm inside the Square Fruit folder, which is located inside the Project Files folder. And we see a whole bunch of different things here. We have the apple, our original apple here. We also have the sliced version. And we have another composition that I did for fun. And then we have the final project image that we will be creating for this tutorial. But what we need to do is open up this apple image that you see right here. I'll just go ahead and double click on that and load that into Photoshop. Great. And then I'll just go ahead and save what we have here for the final project. And I'll just close this out because we no longer need this. But here's the apple. And so the first thing I'm going to do is create a new image to drag this apple into. It's going to be our project image. And everything, all the elements and all the shapes and things will be contained in that image. So I'm going to come up here to File and select New. And for the width, let's enter in 3000. Now you want to make sure that this is set to pixels and not inches for this project. And for the height, we're going to do 2400 and resolution 300 dpi. And then I'll go ahead and click OK. Great. And I'll just move this over here a little bit. But that apple that we did open, what we're going to do is drag this apple from this image into the main project image. Now, I've already cropped the apple for you, so you don't have to do it. Just to save a little bit of time there. So I'm going to select the Move tool, click on this apple, and drag it over to the project image. Just like this. And then we have lots of room to work with around this apple. And so what I can do now is just close this image out. And now we are ready to begin. So I'm going to select the Move tool, and I'm just going to drag this down a little bit down here, and I'll zoom into it so we can see this just a little bit closer. There we go. So we need to decide what type of shape we want to form this apple into. So let's create a new layer. And by the way, before I do that, let me just go ahead and rename this to Apple. There we go. And then I'll make a new layer on top of that, and we'll just name this 3D shape or something like that for the name of this layer. And so what I'll do is over on the toolbar is select the line tool, and for the foreground color, let's just select some color that we won't be using or something that we can see clearly over the fruit. I can just select a green. That'll work just fine. And then next after that, we'll need to come up to the options bar and make a few settings. But you'll see up here at the beginning of the options bar, you'll have 3 buttons here. We have shape layers, we have paths, and we also have fill pixels. We're going to be using fill pixels for this project. And then over here where the weight is, let's increase the weight of this line tool here, just so we can see it a little bit better when we're drawing with this tool. And I can just go ahead and draw a line out just to kind of get an idea on how big this is. I could probably go a little bit thicker on that line, maybe somewhere around 20 pixels. Yeah, that looks good right there. Now I'm going to make that background invisible, and I do have a darker background. By the way, if you want to know how I got this darker background, all I did was went to the preferences into the transparency preferences, and I switched the grid colors from light to dark right here. So let's go ahead and get rolling on this apple. So we're going to create this 3D shape. We need to really look at the apple and utilize the shape that it already is to create the shape that we want. So we have to kind of keep in mind that the angle and the lighting of the apple currently, and create the shape around that. So you can see it is sort of like it's pitched down a little bit, and there's a light hitting it right here on the corner. And so let's go ahead and use that to our advantage. Now I'm on the 3D shape layer, so what I'm going to do is just grab this line tool, and I'm just going to start creating a line. Something like this. There we go. And it doesn't have to be perfect. If you screw up, you can just go ahead and redo it. And if you want, you can make multiple layers. Matter of fact, I'll just go ahead and make a new layer. And then I'll drag down. And we're just creating this box that we're going to form the apple to. That's all really what it is. And I'll just come over here, click, and I'm going to click and draw and connect this to the beginning right there. And then on this corner here, I'll just drag down like that. Now look at that. And after we create the shape, I can actually merge this. I've placed some of the lines on their own separate layers. That way, if you make a mistake, you don't have to erase the entire 3D square or cube. You can actually just redo a portion of it. But I'm going to go ahead and just merge, probably, yeah, merge down there. And so if I select the move tool, I can move this shape around. We can position this where we want. And I think I'll go up here to view and turn off the snap. That way it's just a little bit more free-flowing. You see that? Right about there looks fine. I'll go ahead and leave that. So now that we have this 3D cube, or this shape, this square 3D shape, well, what we need to do is form the apple to this cube. And easy way to do that, we can do it several different ways actually. Now I could easily come in here and use the smudge tool, but for this video we're going to get a little bit more cooler and come up here to filter and use the Liquify command. Okay? But make sure that you have the apple layer selected before you do this. So click on the apple layer, up here to filter, and select Liquify. Now the first thing that we must do is display this three-dimensional cube over the apple, so we can see exactly what we're doing when we form the apple to the cube. So down here where it says show backdrop, you have to put a check in this box right here. And when you do that, you're automatically going to see the cube, because really, by default, it's showing all the layers. And these are only showing transparently, so you can see that we can control the opacity of the layers for the backdrop. We can turn it all the way up as well. But what we must do, though, you see where it says use? We only want to select the 3D shape from this menu. Because see, if we don't just select the 3D shape and we have all the layers selected, well, as soon as we come in here and start painting, we're going to see the original apple transparent in the background. You see that? And we don't really want that. So now if you watch closely, if I come over here and switch just to 3D shape, watch what happens. You see that go away, and it just makes it a lot more easier to work with, so we don't have that distracting background there while we form to the shape. So what I can do is undo that. So we've checked the show backdrop option. You can adjust the opacity to your liking. I don't really need it too high. I can just keep it, 50% will work just fine. How we're going to begin here is we're going to use this tool at the very top. It's called the Forward Warp tool. And this is the magic, folks, right here. This is what does it all. And so if you select that tool, and then over here on the brush size options, you'll need to adjust the size of your brush according to the shape and how large you need it. And so what I can do is just bring this down here next to the apple, click the mouse, and move towards the apple, and you can see it start to push the apple inside. Look at that. And I'm pushing it just towards the line here on the cube, because I really don't want to go much farther than that. And again, this cube here that we've created is only a guide. You don't have to make it exactly perfect to the cube. So there you go. We can also click on the apple inside and push it out as well. You see that? And here's another tip. If you ever make a mistake, you can also use the Reconstruction Tool, which is almost like an undo. Just come over here and click on Reconstruction, and then click on the area, and that will put it back to the way it was originally. You see that? So it's almost like having an undo. All right. And I'll just go ahead and undo that and reselect the forward warp tool and just continue warping this apple to the shape. And I like to make the edges just a little bit rippled. I don't want to go too perfect, so it looks like it's natural. But you can see this is not very hard at all. And you can really use your imagination here. You can create all different types of shapes. You can have an animal, or if you want to make a square pig or something like that, you can do that as well. Just going to move this bottom up here. And if you would like to see what you've done so far and just make this cube here go away, all you have to do is just uncheck the show backdrop right there. So I'm going to move this around here, and everything's looking pretty good. I'm going to increase that brush size just a little bit larger there, and we're going to push this corner in here. And I'll lower the brush just a touch to get inside the corners here. And look at that. You can really start to see how this is coming along. Look at that. And we can hardly even tell that it was round. It's now a square apple. But we're going to make it look a little bit more square later on. But I'm going to come through here and just do a few more touch-ups. Probably increase the brush size a little bit. All right, great. Now another thing that I can do over here on the toolbar, we have a couple tools here, the pucker tool and the bloat tool. Let's select that bloat tool real quick. And I'll just go ahead and make this brush a little bit smaller. And then what I can do is bring out the edges a little bit, bloat them, which is kind of almost like bringing them forward a little bit. Look at that. And I can also do the back here to give it more of that rounded edge. Looks like it's just missing from that around this perimeter here. I'm going to select that warp tool and just pull these edges back in once more. There we go. And we also have the pucker tool. The pucker tool, it just pushes in, basically just pushes in. So if something is pushing out, I can just push it in like this. And that's probably going to be a little bit too big for that side. That way it doesn't look like it's bloating out as much. And I'll go back here and just do a few little touch-ups. All right, great. I think that looks pretty good for right now. I'm just going to come up here and click OK to apply the changes to that layer. There we go. And I can make this 3D shape invisible. And we can also come back to that anytime, just for reference. But here is our apple. And so let's go ahead and make a new layer on top of this apple layer. And I want you to call this one Highlights. Because we are going to include and create some additional highlights over this apple to help it look more like a cube. And we can do this with the paintbrush. So select the paintbrush, and for the foreground you can just select white, or better yet, if you want to get really pro with this, select the red and then make the highlight just have a little bit of red inside of it, like this. And then you're going to want to adjust the opacity for this part. And so let's probably have to turn down the size of this brush as well. There we go. And what I can do is come through here something like this, and then I can erase away parts of that highlight there. And that just sort of helps it give that more of that illusion that it's actually a cube or a squared edge there. And what I can do is hold down or click the mouse in one spot and then hold down Shift and then go down to another corner and click, and then that'll just make a straight line. Now that's just very obvious that we did that with the paintbrush, so we have to come in here with the eraser and touch things up a little bit. Anything you can do so it doesn't look quite, so it doesn't look perfect. It's just a very slight highlight there. And I can also turn down the opacity of this layer just so the highlight just barely shows there. If you find that it's just too sharp, then we can select blur and blur that highlight a little bit to smooth it out, something like that. And then I'll just continue with this highlight around the corner here. There we go, and I'll select the eraser tool and just come through here and touch that up a little bit. I like to make the points or the edges of the highlight sharp. I don't want to get too close to this highlight here because this is so much brighter than these other highlights here, and that doesn't really go together very well. You can see I just want this to be very subtle. And I'll turn down the opacity just a little bit. So you see, and that way it looks more square. And so you can see this is what it was before, and now this is after. And by having those little highlights there, it just, helps tremendously. So there you go. All right, well, what else can we do to it? Well, we can make it a different color. We can add a flame on top of the apple stem. But for this, what we're going to do is bring back the background. So I'm going to click on the background layer right here and bring that back. And we're going to add a shadow over this apple, or actually behind it. So what I'll do is hold down the Control key, which is the Command key on the Mac, and I'll click on that apple layer, then I'll click on the background, make a new layer behind that apple, and then what I'll do is up here, or better yet, I'll just come down here to the paint bucket, and let's just select black, and then I want you to click on the apple And you can see if I click inside the selection, that would fill it with black. And I just made that apple layer invisible there so you could see the black below it. But I'm going to come up here to select and deselect that. Now let's come over here to Edit, Transform, Distort. And so we're going to create this shadow here by distorting it. And I always like to use the original shape or the original object. Sometimes I'll come in here and use the brush or something like that, or a square, but I like to use the original shape of the apple. And we want to make sure that this shadow is behind the edge here, because you can see the highlight is on this corner of the apple. So you don't want the shadow in front of it. You want it more behind it. Something like this. I can come out a little bit. You see on the edge there on the bottom, that'll add a little bit of shadow around it, which is okay, but I don't want to bring that shadow forward too much. Something like this. That looks good. I'm going to come up here and confirm that, and I can select the Move tool, and I can just move this, position that if I need to. Great. Now let's come up here to Filter, Blur, and let's see what we can do by, and whoops, let me go ahead and try that one more time. Filter, Blur, and select the Gaussian blur there, and we can blur this shadow out a little bit. And it's okay if, you know, it doesn't look right when you're inside the Gaussian blur, because I'm going to show you another trick after this. But I want you to pay close attention to the bottom of the apple here, because we do have a shadow on the very bottom of this apple that's very important. Okay? And I think what I'll do is make a different shadow for this around the perimeter of the apple there. And we will focus on the background. There we go. I'll go ahead and click OK. And then what we can do is lower the opacity of this layer here. Then what I'll do is select the eraser tool, and we can come back through here and touch up this shadow a little bit, because it looks like it's just too high right here. So I can make this a little bit larger. And the shadows, I like how shadows just sort of trickle off. They kind of fade off into the distance. And I can just click on here and we can sort of, you know, create this illusion. All right, that looks awesome. Now we're going to create another shadow that's going to go below around the bottom of this apple. So easy way to do this, let's create a new layer. And before I do that, let's just add big shadow for this name here. And I'll click on the background. And let's just put bottom shadow, or whatever you want, just the bottom shadow for this apple. That'll work just fine. I'm going to select the paintbrush once more. And what I'm going to do is, you can see it's just too perfect. It needs a little bit of a shadow around the bottom of this apple. And that might even be a little bit too soft, so I can increase the hardness a little bit. And let's go ahead and try that again. Okay, great. Now I can go back and touch this up if I want to, but I really want to get a full solid shadow around here. And you can see I'm just painting on the layer that we just created, which is below the apple, so it's not going to paint over it. I can select the Move tool and just move this back a touch for something like this, and then clean up the back of it over here. Probably make this just a little bit smaller. There we go. And what we're doing is we're almost just creating this illusion that it's on a table, or like on a stage, or it's just on a white table. And that's all it is. All right, great. Now let's bring in the sliced apple. So let's go back into the Adobe Bridge, and I'll double click on the sliced apple right here and load that into Photoshop. And here's our sliced apple. Now, before we use this image, I want you to move this out of the way just for a second and come over to the project image over here, and I want you to make a new layer above the highlights layer. So I'll just make this, and we'll call it Sliced Apple. There we go. Now what we're going to do is create the shape that will be the shape of the slice, or where the slice is going to be. So we need to decide where the slice will be on the apple using the lasso tool on the toolbar. So come over to the toolbar, select the lasso right here, and I'll zoom into the image just a little bit closer. And so we have to figure out, we can cut the apple down right about there, and then just so we're not on the very edge, but we're cutting off this highlight, so we're beyond the highlight. And so you know, just get an idea on what you're going to do before you do it. That's all I'm saying. So that looks pretty good. And so I'm going to select that lasso once more and start to create this sliced selection. And you don't have to be, you know, you don't have to focus on making it a straight edge, because usually when things are sliced, they're a little rippled around the edges, and so that's fine. And I'm just going to come around here, and I'll probably come up a little bit right where it is right here. And if this is not perfect, don't even worry about it. Later on, you can come back and readjust it, and I'll show you how to do that. So we're just kind of imagining that we've taken the whole side of this apple off with a knife. There we go. Look at that. That looks pretty good. So after we've created a selection, well, easy enough. Let's just go back to the sliced apple image. Now let's copy this sliced apple into memory, and let's paste it inside that selection. So come up here to select, select all, over here to edit, and down here to copy. Then we no longer need the sliced apple, so we can just go ahead and close that. And so while we're on the sliced apple layer with this selection still activated, let's just come over here to edit and paste into, not paste, paste into, because we're going to paste into this selection. Look at that. Now don't worry about how the edges look right now or anything like that. We're going to go back and fix that later on. But what we can do here is I'm going to zoom out of the image. What we must do is distort and resize this sliced apple. But you can see it will only be inside the area that we've selected here. You see that? So we're going to go ahead and transform this sliced apple image inside this mask that we've created. So I'm going to come up here to edit, transform, and let's scale this down just a touch. And then I'll come up here to edit, transform, and let's select distort right here. Now keep in mind that you'll want to align this middle portion here with the stem coming out of the apple as close as possible, because this hollow area here, this is actually where the stem is coming from, and it goes up from there and then out of the apple. So keep that in mind, and I'm just going to play around with this, and we have to distort this sliced apple so it's going in the same, so it looks like it's going in the same direction and position as our original apple. So it might take a little bit of practice. I'm not perfect with it. You know, I make mistakes too, so I'm just going to drag this over here. I'm going to go ahead and confirm this by pressing the Enter key on the keyboard. There we go. And we can still move this around within the layer mask that was created when we pasted this apple. You can still move this around. All right. And it looks over here on the layers palette, you can clearly see that I screwed up on the video and I made this sliced apple layer, and I didn't really need to, because every time that you paste, it creates a new layer. So I actually made a mistake, and that's just the way it goes. So I'm going to go ahead and just throw this sliced layer in the trash that we created, and let's just rename this new layer to sliced apple instead. So I'll just go sliced apple. There we go. Okay, great. After that's activated, I want you to come over to the toolbar and click right here, and I want you to select the healing brush tool. All right. And then what we're going to do is patch up this top portion here right above the pit, so we don't see that. But first, let me make sure that the brush is set correctly. You'll want to have the hardness turned all the way down to 0 when you do this, because you want the patch job to be nice and soft around the edges, so it blends in right. Now for the diameter, I can increase that just a little bit higher. And spacing's okay, we don't need to fuss with that, but I'll just go ahead and click outside of that. All right, so hold down the Alt key on the keyboard, and that's the Option key on the Mac. And then you'll get this little eyedropper tool. I want you to click that next to the pit somewhere over here, and then release the key, and then you'll get the brush back, and then just come over here and patch this up. Just like that. And I'll hold down Alt, click up here a little bit higher, and you can see as I paint over the area that I'm going to patch, we can see that the little crosshair follows us. It'll move down and up and down and to the side depending on where we're moving the brush. You see that? So that's really nice. I'm just going to patch this up a little bit. Look at that. Perfect. Okay, let's zoom out and take a look. And I think what I'll do now is touch up the edges of this slice because they're just a little bit sharp. I'll select the sliced apple layer here. I'm going to click on this layer mask, and let me make that just a little bit bigger so you can see what's going on here. I'm just clicking on this layer mask here, the sliced apple layer mask. And then I'm going to select the brush tool, and we're going to paint with white. So just make sure the foreground color is set to white. And I'll turn this diameter down just a touch here. But I think I'll turn the hardness all the way up, because the edge of the slice, if you're slicing something with a knife, it has a very hard edge. So we must turn the hardness all the way up. And then what I'll do is just come in here, and I can paint. And before I do that, I think I will increase, let me go forward here. There we go. I'll increase the opacity of this brush to 100%. It will still, the brush was still set at 60% from when we were using it previously. So we'll have to set that back to 100% and then come back through here and touch up these edges. Now if we go too far, I can change this to black if our selection was a little bit off, and I can paint the mask back in. Watch this. You see that? Just in case it looks like it's running off the apple here, which we don't want to happen. We want to see the very bottom of that. And the sliced part is just, it's just optional. That's why I wanted to go ahead and create the shadow and everything like that and leave the slice for last. Because this is just, it's just an optional part here. So, well, that looks pretty good. What we're going to do is we're going to make the apple look a little bit old around the edges of this slice. For an example, I can bring in the other image that I created before. And if you look at the edges, you can see how they're it looks like they're a little bruised around the edges. I thought that was totally cool. So let's go ahead and do that to this apple over here. Make sure that the thumbnail on this layer, the sliced apple layer, make sure that's activated, okay? And then over here on the toolbar, you'll find the burn tool, okay? Now when you select the burn tool, up here on the range, make sure that's set to shadows. And then the exposure, you might have to adjust that depending on how, I don't know what kind of image. If you're working on a different image and you're trying to achieve the same effect, it might be a little bit different. But I'm going to leave it at about 70 or 85% right now. And just come in here. Better yet, I'll probably duplicate this sliced apple layer because I don't want to directly work on this layer. If I make a mistake, then there's no way of, I mean, I can undo, but if I can't undo, then I'm pretty much out of luck. So I'm going to make a duplicate of that sliced apple layer and work off that layer instead. But I want to come through here and just paint around the edges, burning the edges with this tool, so it really looks like this was sliced open and then we saw these bruised edges around the apple. Now, I didn't go in the kitchen and slice an apple and actually see if this is what it really looks like. So if this is not right, then I am really sorry. But I just thought this looked so much better having it this way. There we go. Something like that. And I can darken this down here if I want to, if it needs it. And there you go. Looks like it was just on the kitchen counter, and we got a big old knife and just cut that sucker open. But you know what? We can also make this layer invisible and get back the original apple cube. So you can do it either way. And you can have the slices anywhere on the apple that you want. And what I'll do is just merge this top layer here in with the sliced layer below it. We could also lower the opacity of this burnt layer, and so we can adjust how much of that bruised area that we want. But I like it full blast, I think, or I'm just going to turn it down a little bit. And then I'll merge this layer down into the sliced apple by coming up here to Layer and selecting Merge Down. And it'll ask me, yes, let's just go ahead and apply that. That's fine. And there you have it, folks. That is the square apple sliced. I hope you enjoyed it, and for those of you that are warping your fruit into different objects and shapes, and go ahead and send them to me. I want to look at them and check them out. I love to see them. This is just, it's so much fun. So I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. Hope you got a lot out of it, and we'll see you guys on the next video.